All right, hi everyone. I'm going to be talking about my piece, Something, which has been going on since about June 30th, but kind of had its culmination or its end yesterday at the concert yesterday, browsersound.com. I'm going to talk about what this piece was, like a kind of surface level description, and then talk about kind of some aesthetic underpinnings or some aesthetic thoughts about why I did it or what happened and other reflections. So Something is a series of Instagram reels. So these vertical short form videos. You see them on TikTok, you see them in YouTube shorts, and Instagram's flavor of this is called reels. I, along with Alex Waite, Jana DeTroyer, and Kurt Miller, all in separate areas in our respective places we lived, created performances on these videos, and then we created duets or remixes of each other's. It's a series of 8 chains of videos. And the way that these videos are chained together, they're chained 5 times. So it's a total of, there's a collection of 40 videos on Instagram across 4 Instagram accounts. And it was kind of spurred on by an Instagram video. So I guess there's 41 actually. There's me squatting, doing my best impression of an influencer. And I explain the piece in 60 seconds, but there's a little bit more logistics. And so I direct them to a score, which is actually just a Google Doc. And the constraints sort of laid out to myself and the 3 performers are that it's a 60-second video. The performer has to be visible in some sort of way. There's no talking or speech. It's not a semantic kind of performance in that sort of sense. And then the caption is just something followed by a word. I won't explain this in like a super perhaps academically accurate way, but in social media, it kind of trends that people react to content. There's a lot of videos where it's a video on one side and then somebody watching the video on another side. And there's high production values of this. Surgeon reacts to Grey's Anatomy. There's low production of this. Ice Spice just dropped a music video and now I'm watching it. And what do I think about it? And this is a feature built into these short form videos. And that's what we use to create these chains. So we're not responding one after another, but our responses are laid on top of each other. And then finally, it ended on July 21st, where I just played a curation of about 20 of those videos, as well as made some videos in the performance itself. So idea and form are totally broad, vague, like terms that people throw around in like the music world. And I'm going to throw them around right now about as it pertains to idea and form in music, but also in social media. This is kind of the mixture of the two, this piece. And I'll talk about kind of the thoughts that spurred it on, that sort of made me make this piece. And then I'll talk about a bit of a reflection of how those ideas, my expectations of the piece, how they seem to deploy themselves in the actual making of the piece across 4 weeks. I'm going to read a quote by Matt Sakakeeny, and it's he's discussing kind of music as an idea and as a type of sound. So broader subject of sound. And he writes that music is an idea, not just a form. And like any other idea, music is a problem. I think of a problem like kind of like a riddle or something to be solved or critiqued. Yet the omnipresence and widespread recognizability of music as a set of performative acts, objects of inspiration that invite a particular mode of listening, this has elevated its conceptual status above scrutiny. What I took this to mean is that when we think of music, it's so kind of, it's everywhere. And so I'll say that Matt goes on to say, he kind of talks about music as an idea of sound, of that sound is this broader thing that exists, and that the way that we have conceptualized music, perhaps that Western thought has conceptualized of music across time, is first is music was a science of sound. People were talking, the music was a way to express and explain proportions and the stars and planetary harmony, things like this. And then eventually we moved on to this idea of now science sort of explains physical properties of sound, but there's also an aesthetics of sound. And there's also a social life of sound. This is the sound of, this is German music, this is American music, this is music informed by my personal experience or your personal experience. These are like kind of three categories that he kind of posited as a way we conceive of music. And what this spurred in me is, what if I replaced this quote, this idea, with social media, with the broader category being social relationships, or just any kind of relationship we have socially. What is social media? In this same framework, I feel like social media posits certain ideas, or it makes kind of certain speculations or claims about what a social relationship can look like on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram. And these are what I posit in the beginning, in this opening reel. You can watch it on this Instagram account here. But basically I say things like, I got a social media because it's a way to keep in touch with my friends long distance. That is the reason I got a Facebook when I was in the 9th grade, was to keep in touch with people I met at like a church retreat, one summer, and, wanted to stay in touch with them. Social media, I feel like in its kind of classical form, is like a way that we kind of get communities like the Browser Sound community. Shout out Browser Sound community. Like, we are not categorized by a geography, because we have social media and other forms of social internet usage to bring us together. And I kind of put these in sort of opposition with saying, let's do these first two things, and let's not do the other thing that we see social media do all the time, which is kind of like, it's a way to market yourself. It's a way to make public facing content. It's a way to be an influencer. It's some people throw around this word about attention economy, that we're not trying to make money, but we're actually trying to get your attention, which then generates money and capital and other things. But what kind of found itself in the process of making this piece is that it's much more complex than that. I set up this sort of idea that it's one or the other. You're either marketing yourself or you're having a personal relationship, and maybe you maintain both, but they're entirely separate things that you sort of keep the balance of. But in this actual making of the piece, kind of a big part of, I think, social media, or maybe an observation to say, is that there's also like social norms of how we communicate with each other. Just as there's social norms of when I run into you on the street and I say, hi, how are you? And I make small talk, there's also these social norms of how we communicate over social media, over comments and shares and likes and follows. But that doesn't really exist in this way, because I said, this isn't about likes, this isn't about going viral, this is about making music together. And so there's a siren going by. And so when we started making these pieces, the kind of social norms that took over were kind of the musical social norms, or maybe like when it's three or four people who meet together to improvise music, there's also a set of social norms there of how am I listening to another person? How am I responding to the material they make? Things like this. I'm going to play a little bit of this clip and just kind of make a few musical observations about what kind of musical social dynamic is happening. So a few things that kind of happened was, oh, and if it's not already clear, Alex, the pianist, made the first performance. A week later, this buzzing material in to the side was made second. And then on the third week, this snipping of a plant what was done. And there's a kind of, if I did not perform in this particular video, but I make this musical observation of Alex is performing a single process, and the other two videos are also performing a kind of single thing that's happening. One is not quite I guess one is also a process of laying more vibrating objects on top of each other. The snipping of the grass isn't quite accumulating, but it's a kind of block, a kind of texture, a single thing that's happening. And so there's a kind of common thread between those three that I find kind of gives it a musical unity, or what I perceive that Kurt and Yana were responding to in Alex's piece. Maybe Kurt's snipping of the plant is percussive in the same way that the piano is sort of plonking away the piano keys. I'll kind of hold that in the air for a moment. And I'll talk about another reel that happened. And so I think this one is without audio. After they created these chains of 4 people, this is Yana, then myself, and then Kurt, and then Alex, we get people to watch these. It's kind of the sort of original idea behind this remixing or duetting feature, that people would watch the content and react to it. And when it comes to the social norms of reacting to internet content, I feel like it's a little bit similar to how music underscores a film in a lot of ways, is that the reaction has a sense of underscoring or suggesting to a viewer what they can feel or how they can react. To see somebody on the screen visibly surprised or moved or angered or confused, then gives you the kind of suggestion of you can feel this as well, or maybe you also feel a kind of validation that the person on the screen felt this and now so can you. I'm sure maybe if you've been on the internet, you've seen things like this where you can see the kids react to Nirvana and the kids are visibly emoting in a certain way. And that's sort of the whole concept that underpins this. I think kind of the sort of irony or ambiguity or something that was injected into this piece is that the internet content that is being reacted to, it's unclear what it was, because it's kind of mixing together social, is this like some sort of social piece of content, or is it a musical improvisation? Is this person who's watching a musician? The kind of like norms of how to socialize, of how to react are not clear. In a way, one might say that, oh, this opens people up to be more true to themselves, or when you erase the kind of social scaffolding that we enter into, then the expression is more genuine. I don't feel like this is the case. I feel like it's just we're always having some sort of scaffolding, some sort of expected way of interacting, and that a lot of the interactions here are ones of puzzlement, usually because people are not sure how, they're not saying, how do I react? But they're saying, how do I want to ascribe to this sort of project here? Do I want, like, what is this person's agenda? Am I trying to help them out with my reaction? Am I trying to hurt them with my reaction? And for most of these videos, it's purposely made unclear. Are we going viral? Are we just making some music together? And I would say kind of like my thoughts about this is a little bit of a digression before I show the audience participation, but I think that that was kind of a tension that I held in myself as a composer when I write music, or when I think about sort of building an artistic image for myself. This kind of perception that I am making music for an audience, but the audience is also looking to receive something that I made for myself, or that is informed by my own tastes. But my own tastes are, I'm so much wrapped up in what the audience thinks about me, and this kind of I think that this is like a very interesting tension that I sensed in myself, and that I think often becomes a creative roadblock when I make music or when I make art. And so that was my kind of impetus for creating these situations where, yeah, I don't know what to make for this browser sound event, an event that I am also the director of. So I want it to do well, but I want to make a piece for it. But I blah, 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 blah. And I don't know. And so I was like, why don't we all just not know together what to do? And so that kind of extended into the screening of the piece itself. We had the audience reacting to the piece, something they're already doing when they're sitting down. But now I'm kind of inviting them to say, now react and be a part of my piece. And as an audience, you kind of, I think audience participation is also an interesting social norm, because it's maybe not entirely voluntary and not entirely involuntary as well. It's a very, and perhaps we know this because sometimes we go to shows or comedy clubs or musicals, and they walk down the aisle and they're like, hey, how are you today? And you're like, I don't want to, please don't involve me in this. That's how I feel if I was filmed here. But then we come to these places to participate in the kind of making of the performance itself. And this piece is not anything without the kind of audience viewing it. So that was like kind of another layer. I'm wrapping up right now. This is a final point, but earlier I presented these kind of older, sort of the original ideas of the social media. It's personal, it's intimate, it's genuine relationships, or it's marketing, it's public facing. But I feel like what kind of was created or developed by not just my relationship with social media, but also the relationships of social media that Alex, Kurt, and Yana have. They all had very different relationships to social media than I did. And a few kind of things that came up in our discussions is that it's not entirely public facing, it's not entirely private facing, but by the nature of the way social media is constructed, it's kind of like we're performing, we're doing our best impression of being an influencer in front of our friends, families, and cousins. You know, like, who's watching this? The new music community is small. Many of you online, I've met you personally, everyone, and these kinds of things. No one is, I think Alex made this kind of comment yesterday, is like, no one is ever 2 degrees of separate. In most concerts of contemporary music, no one is ever 2 degrees of separation away from the people who are performing the piece. And so, yeah, I would say that that's kind of sort of the whole gist of it. I think I can open it up for any questions that are here. If you want to check out the piece, you can go to my Instagram, and it's linked in my bio. That'll be on the website, stuff like that, blah, blah, blah. But I think I'll wrap it up here. Are there any questions from the sort of Zoom audience or the audience out here before we hand it off to our final presenter?